Thanks for that introduction. For people who don't know, I'm the chair of the Free State Project, and this is my party, and I'm really glad you're here. We're deeply honored to have you here, and I personally actually asked folks if we could get you out here to come speak to us. We are libertarians of New Hampshire, obviously the Free State Project, and we are also the modern peace movement. And I think that's where we truly have overlap. So I wanted to let everyone in the room know I have been collecting questions over the past few weeks and last night on the campground. And in the interest of time and logistics, I actually have a list of questions that we're going to go through that way. I believe we have about 30 minutes before you have to mosey on again. And so I'm just going to sort of start doing it. I hope the time works out. The first question actually does have to do with the modern peace movement. We, of course, everyone in this room really does love your anti-war position. We also have a lot of activists in the state who are working on Defend the Guard legislation. It is a bill that's been introduced that will say that Congress, who has failed us, who no longer declares war, what Defend the Guard would do is it would allow states to say that we will not send our National Guard to foreign wars. As president, would you support that, or would you try to stop the states from doing that?
I have never heard that proposal before. I think it's a really interesting proposal. I don't want to cop out. I would want to think about it before I gave you an answer, but I'm happy to give you an answer. I need to think about that first.
Okay. Do you, how would you go about sort of reducing our footprint overseas, and perhaps how could we get out of this war in Ukraine?
I think it's going to be quite easy to get out of the war in Ukraine. I mean, we now know, we found out in the last couple of weeks, that President Putin and President Zelensky, our Prime Minister Zelensky, actually signed an agreement in April of 2022, and that the Russians were complying with that agreement, but they had already began removing their troops from around Kiev, and that Boris Johnson was sent there clearly, at the behest of the White House to sabotage that agreement. And that's not the first time we've done that. I mean, Zelensky, the involved nations, France, Germany, and Russia all agreed to the Minsk Accords earlier on. And in 2019, when Zelensky ran, he ran on the basis of signing the Minsk Accords. He ran as the peace candidate. This is a guy who is a comedian and an actor, which I'm not disparaging because that's what my wife does, so I'm not going to say anything better. And he was not a politician, a veteran politician. Why did people vote for him? They voted for him because he was the peace candidate. And the Ukrainian people wanted peace. That's what they wanted. And as soon as he got to office, Victoria Nuland was over there pressuring him, along with people from the ultra-nationalist right within Ukraine, to pivot and to walk away from the Minsk Accords. And we've now killed 350,000 young men over there that have been killed in that war. And I'm not an apologist for Vladimir Putin. It's a brutal war. It was illegal. He had other choices. We also need to look at our role in the provocations going back to 1997. Oh, by the way, let me ask the second question. How do we wind down the empire abroad? The answer, we have now 800 bases abroad. Chinese have 1.5 bases. I don't think the Russian, I don't know if the Russians have any now, you know, outside of the Ukraine. I don't know if they have any. We have, each one of those bases is a platform for future war. And we were told that, you know, in 1992, when the wall came down in Germany, and the Soviet, and Gorbachev agreed to dismantle the Soviet Empire, we were told we were going to get a peace dividend. We were told that we were going to stop investing in billion-dollar stealth bombers that can't fly in the rain, and that we would bring that money home to build schools and roads and infrastructure and help lower taxes and help farmers convert to regenerative agriculture, all the things that we ought to be doing as a nation. But none of that happened. We were told that our military budget was going to go from $600 billion a year to $200 billion a year. And that would be enough to protect our borders, to arm ourselves to the teeth, to spend more on our defense than any other nation in the world. We step in today more than the top 10, next 10 nations combined. We spend 3 times what China spends. It's not good for our economy, it's not good for our national strength, and it has not helped American security or safety. We are much more in danger because of those military adventures abroad. With the reason we're going through, you know, I'm going to have to go through all these X-ray machines and searches today. I didn't have to do that before we got involved, you know, with these military adventures after in the late 1990s in the Mideast. So it hasn't made us safer. It hasn't made us more secure. It certainly hasn't made us more free. We now spend, instead of $200 billion that we were promised, we now spend $1.3 trillion on all the military expenditures, and that includes national security. So we have, I think, 880 million here military, 300 million on veterans, which we need to do, and then the rest of it on national security at home. And you know, that is bankrupting the middle class in this country. I'm going to wind down that. I'm going to very, very quickly, I'm going to wind down that, and I'm going to start instead rebuilding our industrial base in this country and focusing on giving Americans the freedom they need for entrepreneurial activity.
Entrepreneurial activities. Our favorite entrepreneur is actually Ross Ulbricht. So Ross Ulbricht was the founder of Silk Road. His mission in life was to try and reduce the harm of the drug war. He built a website and he allowed people to test their drugs, to pay with private money, and it was a way to try and reduce that harm of the drug war. I know at Bitcoin Miami, you actually did say that you would look into Ross's draconian double life sentence. This man was in his 20s, and you know, they threw the book at him. They threw the Schumer book at him, by the way. And I was wondering if you've looked at the matter a little more and whether you'd be willing to go on record, if you were President of the United States of America, would you pardon Ross Ulbricht?
So, you know, as I said at the Bitcoin conference, if I will immediately investigate this when I become president. I will, and if I find that Ross Ulbricht was punished as an example, then I will give it clemency.
Okay.
Free wrong!
That's not, you know, that is not consistent with American justice, and it's wrong.
His mother is here. She has done the yeoman work over the years just to try and get this story out. I will say from a personal perspective, I'm originally from South Africa, And I actually worked on the Nelson Mandela stuff back in the 90s when he was freed, and I think that we should think about this notion of Ross's role sort of in the world as something very similar, that he should have international attention. People should understand that this was a grave, grave, grave travesty of justice. Keeping in the line with sort of whistleblowers and our favorite little rogue folks, we also support whistleblowers fighting the system, people like Julian Assange. Yes. By the system, and of course Edward Snowden, who actually I at Liberty Forum in 2016 from Russia. As president, what can we do to help these people? How can we change this? How can we get back on the right track? How can we actually understand that whistleblowers play an incredibly important role, and they should be heroes, not traitors?
I will pardon both Assange and in this country are not at the barricades demanding that Assange gets removed. Assange isn't even really a whistleblower. He was a publisher. He just published something. And that means that anybody who republished what he published, which is the New York Times and everybody else, why aren't their publishers also facing jail? Congress has made the case for Snowden because Congress used the revelations that none of us knew about, that we were being spied on, and all of our personal data was being gathered and was being archived by the intelligence apparatus, and nobody knew it, all illegal. And Congress was shocked to learn it, and Congress went out and passed laws to protect us against that. So, it's hard to make an argument that Snowden did something that was inconsistent with the most deeply held and most idealistic American values and personal courage.
Next. No, this isn't softball. Would you consider appointing any libertarians to your cabinet? I'm for hire.
Of course. I'm going to appoint people. I'm going to have every kind of diversity in my cabinet, and I want to hear everybody's opinions. And libertarians are so great for this country. I always agree with everything that people say, particularly when it comes to regulating the commons. These are people who understand the importance of critical thinking and are constantly reminding us of our most deeply held values. So they need to be listened to at every level of government.
New Hampshire is a constitutional carry state, so we don't need a permission slip from the government in order to carry guns. Obviously, I'm sure you followed the discussions here about the gun-free zone. You're our guest. We wanted to accommodate you. We work with your stuff. But there are also 13 other states that no longer require a permit to carry a gun. Do you think the Second Amendment, because you were talking earlier about all these constitutional things, and the second is a big one for us. So do you think the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear arms free from government permission slips?
let me explain my view of the Second Amendment. I would probably be supportive of a less expansive view of the Second Amendment. I support the Constitution, and that includes the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court has given a very, very expansive view to the Second Amendment, and so that's what we live with. I think it's, I can tell you this, I'm not going to take away anybody's guns as President of the United States. I believe, there's a terrible, terrible problem in this country with school shootings and with other mass shootings. And we have to figure out a way, all of us working together, a way to deal with that issue. And I agree. I want to hear everybody's suggestion. I grew up in rural areas in this country. I grew up surrounded by people who for whom their ownership of guns was almost existential in terms of their belief in this country. And it was so integrated, particularly into rural culture. And because of that, and because of the very expansive Supreme Court rulings about the reach of the Second Amendment, I think the capacity, even if there was one, to reduce school shootings or reduce that risk by gun regulation just doesn't exist. And it's such a polarizing issue now, at this time in history, where all of us have watched all of our other constitutional rights under assault. And there's a lot of people in this country that, rightly or wrongly, believe that the reason that the Second Amendment is the only one that didn't come under assault in the last few years is because of the Second Amendment. I'm not going to change that belief. And attempting to do so is just going to further polarize our country. And I want to bring people together. And I want to bring them together by focusing on the issues that, not the issues that separate us, but the values that hold us together, that we share in common. And those values, particularly at the top list of those values, is how do we protect our children? And how do we protect them from dangerous drugs? How do we protect them from the pharmaceutical industry, from toxins in our food, and from gun violence? And I think, what I will do as president is bring people together to talk about all the ways to do that. I have many, many ways to do that I've thought about and my team is thinking of, but we want to include everybody in that discussion and reach those solutions through collaboration and rather than through antagonism.
Awesome. And a comment to that, I'm sure you're aware of this, but with Big Pharma, they don't want to look into the link between school shootings and RSS medicines. So, I would encourage you to at least look at that link, and then also perhaps as president commission some kind of something that we can look at, because I think it's fairly clear there is some correlation.
Thank you for bringing that up.
I've looked at this issue, and I've spoken about it, and of course I take a lot of heat, which I don't care about. But the one study that I've been able to find is a study that shows that at least 23% of school shootings that the shooter had a history of SSRIs. That is a correlation. It does not prove causation, but it's clearly something we ought to be looking at. If only for the fact that the manufacturer's inserts for those products say in black and white that they cause suicidal homicidal behavior and ideation. And so there are other things that we need to look at too, which, the role of video games, the role of social media, and many other things. We need to do that in a scientific, evidence-based way. This is what NIH should have been doing. NIH is supposed to protect our children. Yes. It's impossible almost for a journalist to look into this issue because of the HIPAA laws. Mm-hmm. We can't find out whether those shooters were on SSRIs or not. And because of that, NIH is the only entity that can pierce that and depersonalize the data and tell us the answers, and they won't do it. And I suspect they won't do it for the reason that they won't study anything else that is going to potentially reduce